No, because I know a lot of people are gone. Like, there's legitimate, like, neuropsychs, most of them are gone. They left today. And Corman's gone.
You're right. We're here. Let's do it.
I am, but I want to have more of a conversation than anything. Okay, so I'm going to breeze through the first part. For most of you know, my area of expertise is trauma. And one of the things I learned a bit long ago when I first started was just the difference in lingo. One of the things that I learned very early on was the definition of trauma from an MD perspective versus a PhD society, psychologist, mental health professional perspective. And that was always kind of a running joke in the war was, oh my, you educated me to know what trauma really meant. So for the purpose of this talk, when I talk about trauma, I talk more about the psychological piece that stems from an injury or an illness or some type of event that potentially led you to be in this hospital. So ACEs, has everyone heard of ACEs for the most part? So adverse childhood experiences. There's a lot of literature that's been coming out in the past, 5 to 10 years now about the impact of these adverse experiences on both mental and physical health. It started with Kaiser did a study, I think in 2000 maybe, basically looking retrospectively at their patients and finding that those patients who had as children adverse events, parents in jail, poverty, really negative life events, they were more likely as adults to have heart disease, cancer, chronic mental health and physical health problems. And so since then, research was doing it more retrospectively and then more recently within the past 5 to 10 years, starting to look at it more in kids. We know that there's a dose-response relationship, so as the number of adverse exposures go up, as do the negative consequences go up. And I have a figure in a minute. These are the diseases, like I mentioned, heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, liver disease. They're also more likely to have mental health problems, substance abuse, suicidal, negative social relationships with others. This is a figure we did. This was actually done in kids, where as you can see, the number of traumas that went up, so did the risk that they were going to have attachment problems, behavior problems, academic problems, behavior problems at home, and self-injury. So this really highlights why it's really important. And you guys know this. I mean, I've had so many conversations, Cindy and I have talked about it a lot, is these kids are coming into your clinic and they have more than just their injury. There's so much more going on, and what are we supposed to do with how do we deal with that? How do we identify these kids? What's what? Chicken and the egg? What came first? How do we disentangle all of this? Recently, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with this. The underlying factors that can exacerbate health barriers to learning are adverse experiences. We know that approximately 48% of children have experienced at least one negative event. That's huge. However, only a third of pediatricians actually ask. So I will preface that my talk was work that we did with pediatricians, but I do think that it very much is relevant to what we do today in the NDSC. So it's really fantastic that people have raised awareness about ACEs, traumas, that we really need to be doing something about it, as well as integrated care is important. So having that medical piece and mental health piece work together is incredibly important. We know that these kids have better outcomes if that happens. And the NDSC does a decent job of working together. I do think we're integrated more than other clinics, which is nice to see. But again, there's always levels of integration. For those of you who don't know, I'm a part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. This is a network of sites across the United States. I think there's about 80 of us right now that are currently funded, and there's over 200 that are affiliates, so have been funded at some time, but still a part of the network. And these centers can be mental health centers, hospitals, academic universities, and we all work together to try to raise awareness about the impact of trauma. And one of the wonderful things about the NCTSN is it's not just about one specific trauma. Like you can find, domestic violence organization, child abuse organization. We encompass all traumas. So when you go to their website, you can find information about any trauma. It could be an injury, it could be illness, it could be, witnessing terrorism. Think of it, they've got some information on it. So they came out with a definition. One of the interesting things that's happened over the past 5 years is the AAP came out with their toxic stress and ACEs, and at the same time the NCTSN is talking about traumas, and people were really getting confused by the lingo, like what's what and what do we need to be worried about and talking about, and how do I even communicate with a pediatrician when he's saying, or she is saying toxic stress, and I'm saying trauma, and making sure that we're on the same page when we speak to each other. So when we talk about trauma-informed, our definition is recognizing that the kids come and they have baggage. They have things that are happening in their environment, and we need to be aware of that and how that's impacting their medical care and their health outcomes, both mental and physical health outcomes. So this is about the NCC. So what I wanted to talk about today, and then potentially have a discussion about how we actually can roll this out in the NDSC to some extent. I was part of a Pediatric Integrative Learning Collaborative. Do you guys know what learning collaboratives are, or kind of remember? Doobie would talk about them. I'll go briefly into detail about it. So it was funded by SAMHSA. Johns Hopkins was the one that put it on. We were part of their third learning collaborative, and there were 6 sites total. And I don't know if you remember Larry Wizzo. He came out 3-4 years ago and talked at our DBE's conference, or the May conference. He was kind of in charge of the whole thing. So we had 3 face-to-face meetings, and each meeting kind of worked on Pdsa Cycles, which are quality initiative ways of kind of doing mini research projects, basically. It's plan, do, study, act. You basically take something, and I'll have concrete examples. You take an idea, you take something you want to test, and then you test it over a really short period of time, like 2 weeks. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to screen for depression in epilepsy patients. And we're then going to sit down and see what worked and what didn't work. We're going to look at what didn't work, and then we're going to try to improve it, and we're going to do another Pdsa cycle. So then for the next 2 weeks, we're going to do it. So we had a bunch of different goals, and I'll talk specifically about that. But we met in Baltimore for 3 face-to-face meetings. They were 2.5-day meetings. And then we worked with the HF in Worcester. And I'll talk a little bit about them in a second. We had meetings with them, either in person or via phone, twice a month. And then we had affiliate groups. So there was a pediatrician group, there was a researcher group, there was an admin person group, there was a parent group, and there's one other group. And so you would talk to other people who were a part of these 6 sites, who were the researchers, or who were the pediatricians. So you guys can kind of collaborate together and brainstorm from my perspective, this is what's happening. So this was the team. Shelly Russell was our pediatrician. She was wonderful. Many of you may remember Nikki. She is their operations supervisor, so she was on that team. Tina was actually, whoever, if you guys haven't met Tina, she's wonderful. She was actually a nurse who's been in that practice for, I think, 16 years. But she was also a parent of a traumatized child. So she had a really interesting way of looking at things. Like, as a nurse, this is my perspective, but also as a parent, this is what you go through. So she was really key to this. Beth Bob was our mental health therapist. She's actually here 3 days a week, I think, over in Locust. And then she's in the Worcester Clinic twice a week. Myself, Pat, and Carol. These were the other sites. You can see we had a nice mesh of all across the United States, which is kind of fun to learn about the cultural things. These are the 6 areas of change that we were focused on. I'm not going to go into much detail, but basically you want a trauma-informed office. And one of the things that I really liked is you can be trauma-informed. I think we all understand that our patients come in and when they have bad things happen to them, it impacts their care. I think we get that, so we're informed. But I really like the trauma responsive. So we are trauma-informed, but are we really responding to these kids appropriately? Do we really know what to do and how to handle this? Working with parents, we collaborate with mental health services, promoting resilience, identifying issues, and then identifying and addressing symptoms. These are just the goals. Again, I talked about Pdsa Cycles. So that's Shelly and Beth, in case you guys don't know them. So these are the specific cycles that we did. The first thing we did was just education. And education, not so much we did it with the providers, but also with our staff. There's a really great TED Talk. Have you guys seen this TED Talk by Nadine Harrisburg? Holy cow, it is really phenomenal. She is a dynamic speaker, and it really speaks to whatever your job is, it speaks to you. Like, she just really gets it. So it was a really wonderful talk. So we kind of disseminated that, as well as talked about just the effects of trauma on the children and their caregivers. Carol also did compassion fatigue, so that chronic stress that happens in the actual staff and providers, that they themselves can be impacted by these things that they see. And then we did something for the juvenile justice and talked about trauma. Again, we really tried to get out into the community, and that really spread throughout time. Any questions so far? I'm kind of going kind of fast. We get to discussion. No? So interested in people's feedback on this. We did start Well, okay, so the initial intent was we wanted to screen for trauma, wanted to identify these kids, and legal gave us a huge pushback on that. Like, if you screen, you have to be able to do something about it. So we got an issue. So we're like, okay, but how do we at least help in the identification of these kids? And so we gave information. So we weren't screening, we just gave information about traumas and bad things that happen and things to kind of look for. And I have a picture of what we gave out. So these were the clinics that we worked with. And this was before the Learning Collaborative. And they got a packet. So when they checked in for a well visit, someone in the front desk gave them a packet. It had an introductory letter and then a checklist that we had created, as well as a list of resources, so mental health agencies within the area, NCTS had information sheet about what trauma is, and then a trauma services brochure. So this is what they got. So they got a letter that says, as your medical providers, it is helpful for us to know if your child has ever experienced anything bad, sad, or scary. This packet includes information about life events your child may have experienced and possible reactions to these events. Please read over this information and share with your thoughts with your provider. This will help us work together, so on and so forth. And then this was the information. This was the actual screener that wasn't a screener that we gave. Again, we did not ask them to endorse. We did not ask them to check things. Just look at it. If you wanted to talk to your provider, please feel free to do so. And in theory, the provider then checked in on the family. Did you get the packet? Did you have a chance to look at it? Do you have any thoughts or questions? That happened every once in a while. Thoughts on this? Like it, don't like it? Good, bad?
I think if I got that and I was looking at it as a parent, I mean, there's a lot of things listed on there that just kind of seem like every kid goes through.
Mm-hmm.
So I might dismiss it
Mm-hmm.
because I would say, of course my kids had nightmares or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
great. There's services for nightmares, but I mean, me in this setting, I know that that's not the case. But if I were just any Joe parent or whatever, I probably would dismiss it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that at least my perspective is like we have parents fill out a lot of questionnaires, and I think it's overwhelming for them. So I wonder if like when they're just handed paper, if they look at it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it may depend a little bit on the specific parent, but I think there's probably a large group of parents that
Mm-hmm.
that don't even give it a second glance.
And we got that pushback from the front desk staff was there's a lot of stuff we're giving them, and so we tried to time it with the well child visits where they weren't receiving packets.
That's
you know,
good.
like I
Yeah.
know like at certain ones you get X, Y, and Z. So they were just trying to, and at some point they were like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be giving this, I'm just giving this at times. So
Yeah.
it wasn't standardized at all. As much as we hoped it would have been, it wasn't.
Yeah.
Okay. So we did end up giving information to about 2,200 kids. We had good feedback. Someone said that their neighbor may need it. If they themselves didn't, but their neighbor might. And then the providers really liked the information. I will say, I've had this for people within the NDSC, the thing that the providers got most excited about is the list of mental health providers in the area.
Mhm.
Like that's the thing that they got extremely excited about. And actually I have something for you guys if you want it, which I can do that at the end. We gave out a survey, so one of the Pdsa was to really get feedback as to what their thoughts were about it. One of the big pushbacks we got at the beginning was the amount of time it was going to take. This was going to take too much. We have too much we need to do. Actually found that it was about what we expected. It really didn't take that much time. And that over half found out of at least one adverse event from doing this. So that to me was huge. I thought that was fantastic. And then over half ended up getting a mental health referral based on that information that they gave feedback to, which again, out of 2,200 kids, that's really great. And they found the information pretty useful. Okay, so specific to Worcester, so Worcester had the opportunity, we were able to actually buy out time, which helped. And so we had time to sit down and really think about how do we want to be really thoughtful about this. So it's one thing to give out packet, and you may or may not do something with it. Let's really do this in a systematic manner. So the first thing they did, who's heard of the SEEK and the SWIC? Anybody? I have copies. So again, I came prepared with copies. So we really wanted, Larry was a big fan of these two assessment measures, and it kind of was what was primarily used. The SEEK, the SWIC actually, I was surprised they didn't pick the SWIC, because the SWIC actually has behavioral metric milestones also, so we thought that was gonna be really appealing to the pediatricians. But they actually piloted both, so we did it for about a 4 week to a month. They gave both assessment measures, the SEEK and the SWIC, to find out which one felt best for their practice, for they as practitioners, and how did the families respond to those. And they actually ended up choosing the SEEK, which I thought was interesting. And again, I have copies if people want to look at it. Here's the SWIC, and then here's the SEEK. So the SEEK is 20 items. It does address parental depression, parental substance abuse, harsher punishment, parent stress, partner violence, and food insecurity. So it tries to get at the more significant adverse events. And then they do these at all well-child visits. They fill out the SEEK. And it's discussed with the providers. And they actually have built into EPIC kind of the results of the SEEK and what they're going to do, whether or not the referral was made. So this is in case it hasn't been around. These are some of the questions on there. We also added 4 more questions. Based on kind of the learning collaborative and what we were hearing from other sites, we felt that there was a lot of negative things on there, and we really wanted to start to incorporate some more positive things also. So, talked about, do you have any concerns about learning and development? So these are the 4 questions that they added that the provider asked from the kids. Do you have any concerns about learning and development? Do you have concerns about their behavior? What are some good things that have happened in the past few months? And then what are 2 fun activities that you do with your child? So trying to incorporate, yes, we're recognizing that there's some bad things that are going on, but you have some resiliency and you have some positive things. Let's also identify those so that we can help keep that going. Questions so far? No?
Unless they have like all bad answers to those too, it's like,
Well,
then you help them then find you're
That
really.
helps you too. If they're
Yeah.
like, no, they're having trouble with too, right? They're like, okay, let's talk about that.
Parental counseling list.
Well, then you help them find, I mean, that happens to me sometimes,
Yeah.
then you help them find an answer, because if you spend some time with them, you can be like, oh, I remember you said he started soccer, you know, is that something good, can we add that to the list? I won't let them leave the room until they've given me
Something good.
And I've sort of been at a standstill with some families, and I say, well, we gotta come up with something.
Yeah.
We're gonna sit here until you come up with something, because I want it always to be positive.
And speaking to that, we really wanted to continue to build that. Like that, families really responded well to that, and it got the providers excited. So another PDSA we did is we came up with these goal cards. So these little cards, so at each visit they get the card, and they get a magnet, cookie magnet thing for your fridge, to stick on your fridge. And they're supposed to come up with a SMART goal, at least one SMART goal. And then it becomes a sticky note in EPIC, so that the next visit, they can then circle back around and say, hey, at the last visit you talked about soccer. How is that going? And so it reminds the provider also that, yeah, we need to be talking about this. And the family, in theory, is also thinking about it because it's on their fridge. So that's been actually a huge plus. The group really likes that. And if anyone's interested, I'm happy to get the cards if anyone wants this stuff. We can talk at the end, but keep that in mind. Okay, so using the SEEK, we screened about 900. This was data was collected about a month and a half ago. We then also had, so Tina followed up with some of the families. So some of the families we felt pretty comfortable with that were really embedded in the clinic. We called them up to kind of say, hey, what are your thoughts on this process? How did you feel that it go how it went when we asked you about the SEEK and the SWIC? The families, again, they liked the SEEK better than the SWIC, which I thought was interesting. And that most agreed that it was appropriate to ask. They didn't feel uncomfortable with the provider asking them. Although the only negative comment was like it was opening up a can of worms. They were not, it's probably the family needs to be working with the most is that family. But they're really, out of all of them, only one was really hesitant to answer any questions. And that's been true of most of these families. We haven't really gotten a lot of pushback.
Sarah, can I ask, I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you have a sense, because this was in Worcester, so do you have a sense of like how much might have been Amish population or, like the demographic?
Yeah, very small percentage were. And it's interesting, and we'll talk, Worcester itself is like, it's that sweet spot. And when I talk about the advisory board, there's this level of the community was so excited that this was happening. And everything meshed well. And I think because they're not so big, I know in Stark and Summit we have some boundary wars and turf wars with agencies and whatnot. And for whatever reason in Worcester, it was lovely.
It's not a lot of Amish in Worcester.
No, I mean, they talk, and, you know, Shelley mentions it from time to time, but of the people that was never brought up as a barrier.
It's mostly Wayne County.
Yeah, but some of them come to the school for
Actually, I'll jump ahead to the advisory board. So, one of the key pieces, so Beth is there twice a week, which is great, and she's a phenomenal therapist, but she's only one person twice a week. So as we start identifying these families, needing to be able to refer out and feeling comfortable with who you're referring out to. So we got the community mental health agencies all came together, or most of them, I think about 75% of the agencies within that county came together, and we started meeting about once a month and kind of talk about, okay, what does your clinic specialize in? What are you comfortable receiving? And how do we keep that referral process going? So yes, we can make the referral to you. We have no idea what happens to those people. Like, see you later, like, best wishes. How do we make sure that it circles back around? And that we know that they're attending and we know how things are going. We don't need no specifics, but as medical providers, that really you guys are working together on that. So they came up with a referral process. There's a common referral form. I actually don't have a copy of it. But that's actually working very, very nicely. And then with that came an advisory board. So really as a community, they wanted to build a network. So these are all the people on the advisory board. So you have mental health, but you also have the schools and juvenile justice, child services. Someone from the Morgan Foundation also comes. So you have a really nice gamut there of people who see these kids, have the ability to help these kids, and we're all sitting at the table. So they meet quarterly. They all sit at the table and they talk and have open conversations about how do we make this better. They've come up with, like with anything, you have one committee, it turns into 8 million more committees. But they created subcommittees that have just started that deal with different things because they recognize we're only meeting once a quarter. We can only get so much done, so we the smaller groups are kind of moving forward. They have created a Wayne County Trauma and Resiliency Network. As a sidebar, Ohio itself created trauma-informed care initiatives and was broken into different sectors and whatnot. And so Wayne County said, okay, we'll do ours, but we're also going to stand alone and get our own work done. That's kind of cool. Going back, and potentially some of our mental health workers can speak to this. One of the things Beth was really struggling with is, okay, that's great, I'm here and I'm happy to help, but I can't bill for most of the stuff that I'm doing because it's the casual conversations in the hallway. And so we really wanted to get at, like, how much time are you really spending? Like, let's break this down. So she collected data July through September every time she had that informal hallway conversation with someone. And it turned out to be about an hour a day that she was spending doing that. So her solution was once a month, she at lunchtime on a Friday, she sits herself down in the cafeteria or whatever, their little break room, a small clinic. She sits herself in the lunchroom, and that's her case. She is open for people to come in and talk about cases. So don't bother me in the hallways. You can, but for the most part, here's my time. I am here for that. Please come speak to me during that time. And that's really helped her a lot. It's kind of contained things a little bit. Providers know where to find her. They know that she's going to be there during that time. And it also allows for, again, notifying, hey, let's touch base about this kid. So that's working well. Some of the interesting things that, Beth has kind of found is the whole breaking the glass issue and providers freaking out about breaking the glass and what does that mean and what can they do. And she wanted, at one point, I'm going to get a shirt that says, break the glass, and wear that. And that was interesting to her. Obviously they want a mental health provider every day, and the families appreciate having a mental health provider and having that communication. Stuff we already knew, but it was nice to have that data behind it. Okay, so kind of things that we've learned, and then I'll open it up for conversation. Obviously education is important, education for everyone. I think the staff really appreciated understanding why we were doing what we're doing, and some of the things that these kids may be dealing with and what that means. And that the mental health agencies really did want to collaborate. They were very excited about having the opportunity to talk about themselves, and not just from a financial standpoint, but really genuinely to help these kids. That, look, this is what I do, please refer to me, and please let me be able to talk to you, and now I know how to talk to you. Like before, they didn't know how to reach out to the medical provider. Like, I know that you're seeing Dr. Russell, I have no idea what that means or how to reach her. Again, medical providers can help with resiliency. Talking about trauma, the families really were pretty responsive. They weren't upset about it. They just, okay. PDSAs were wonderful. That was really nice. Barriers, the time. We were very fortunate to be a part of this collaborative. I think otherwise it would have been really challenging to have that time to sit down and really think through this. A short appointment time. We have a lot to do in a little period of time. How do we get all this done? How do you bill for this? Therapy office in a medical clinic. So most of us have decent therapy offices, but Beth is seeing literally it's a medical office with the whole table thing. And so she was really struggling with how do you make that therapeutic to talk about like really bad things that are happening to you when there's all this other stuff going on in privacy. We know what that's like. Recommendations, again, when we gave this out to higher ups, educating staff about integration and trauma-informed care, that it's not just about being informed. I think we all are informed. It's about being responsive and being responsive appropriately. And having that structured time for consultation and the importance of collaboration with our community agencies. They really pushed for, this is specific to that HIP, but a regional case manager to help them. They don't have a case manager and they really struggle. Tina, the nurse, really serves as a case manager, so they really want something down there. They also thought of the idea of HIPs and mental health providers and HIPs. So they have mental health providers in a lot of the HIPs. And this was interesting to learn, and you guys probably know more than I do, but some of the mental health therapists in some of the our HIP offices aren't children's therapists. And so they have their own supervision and own rules and regulations. So that's really hard when you're an HIP, and how do you deal with that, and how do you punish isn't the right word, but you know what I mean? Like, how do you all do what you're supposed to be doing when you have no say whatsoever in what they do? And the idea that just because a mental health therapist is in your office, they can just be co-located. So they can just physically be in your space, but that does not mean you're integrated. That does not mean you're having that communication whatsoever. They're not on Epic. What does that mean? How do you communicate with this person? So there's all sorts of issues with that. And I think sometimes people think, there's a mental health therapist. Check. We're good to go. Let's move on. There's a lot of layers to this. And then how do you build sustainability? Okay, real quick before I open it up, here's some more resources. Like I said, NCTOSN, it's a great resource, has resources for parents, resources for providers. I will preface that most of the providers are mental health providers and not medical providers, but they are really trying to change that. CHOP is a part of the NCTOSN. Some of the things that they've come up with is the healthcare toolbox. How do you talk to kids about trauma? How do you talk to providers about trauma? Another one after the injury, I thought about the TBI clinic. Here's some symptoms, here's some things. They're really great materials that we give out. AAP also has just tons of materials. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And then one thing I have, and so the NCTSN did come up, one of the big gaps that we openly acknowledge is this idea of how do you deal with trauma in children with developmental disabilities. We've never dealt with it before. Towards the end of last grant cycle, so last year, they came up with a toolkit. I have it if someone's interested in it. However, it is geared towards, how do I say this? So it's geared towards me training mental health professionals on how to work with children with developmental disabilities. So it is not geared towards medical providers at all. Although when I said that, they said, well, there's stuff in there, da da da. Okay, I think it's a really great tool. I think it's a really great for information. I also have it saved. I'm happy to email it to people. It's a very, as you can see, a very big file. Potentially SharePoint might be a mechanism to disseminate it. But it is, if you're just interested in facts and data, how they're encouraging mental health therapists to work with children with disabilities who have been traumatized, it's here. It just started. So, I'm going to preface, this is like a year. And so they haven't gathered data on it. This is just their first stab at it. But it's interesting. So, for what it's worth, that is it. Okay. I also have lots of copies and can give people more copies. I think Cindy's got quite a lot of copies if you want to hit her up. But this is a list of, during our grant cycle, trained, we did our own learning collaborative with TFCBT, so trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you're looking for really good trauma therapists, these are certified. There are probably others, but these are the ones that we know have gone through and been blessed with TFCBT. So, and it's broken down by county. It's not every county, but it hits the main county. So if you would like some of these, I also can email it to you if you like. It's there. And I do believe in the TBI, I don't know, anyway, it's here, if you want more copies. I have other screeners that have just common screeners that are used. If someone would like to, they'd like to look at the screeners, you're welcome to look at them. You know, the big question that I kind of ask people when they say, well, we want to screen for trauma. Okay, great, fantastic. Do you want to screen for exposure or do you want to screen for symptoms? And I think you got to figure out that question first. Do you want to figure out if the kid has been exposed to an adverse event or a traumatic event? And some of you know, like with TBI, you know that they've had a trauma because that's an injury. But with other ones like seizures, you don't necessarily know that they've had a trauma. Or do you want to know the symptoms so that you know that they have a trauma? You need to assess their level of symptomatology. Just because you have a trauma or an adverse event doesn't mean that you have PTSD, you have all these negative things. You're just more at risk. So let's assess your level of risk and what we can do to help with that. Okay, I'm done. That was really quick, but I'm done because I really wanted to have some type of conversation about it if people are interested or have questions or comments. I know lots of people ask me about it, so I know that there's conversations happening about trauma. Are people assessing for trauma? You guys have to, yeah. Do you think
say routinely unless probably shouldn't say
Don't ask, don't tell.
Right. I was gonna ask, are people implementing it already? But that answers my question.
We use the ACEs.
the CTES, Child Trust
Right,
Event
isn't that what
Survey?
it is the spelled into? Epic. So it's always interesting to me because the first question is that have you ever experienced anything bad, sad, or scary? And I think that it is designed to kind of open up the conversation and kind of normalize trauma because, I think, every kid has experienced something bad, sad, or scary, right? But almost always they say no. And I'm like, really? Like my kid didn't get the green bowl this morning and that was bad and sad. So I don't know. I always, I find that even though that is the most common research, it seems like they're using it a lot in research, and so we ask it that way because that's how it's standardized, and we were trained to do it in the standardized way. I often will follow it up with, have they ever been a victim of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, even though.
And I think a lot of that stems from people parents are gonna be so upset if we ask this question. They're gonna freak out about this. And they're not.
Sometimes they don't wanna talk about it. I have problems when I speak to families and ask them, okay, what happened? And they're like, oh, we don't wanna talk about it. And then there's just treat the headache, we don't wanna talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I
Right.
can't treat the
Right.
headache till I know something about it, you know?
Right.
I don't want too much details, but at least just a little tidbits.
That's true.
So it is challenging, but I think it's some amount of screening is important because what we see as seizures, pseudo seizures, a lot of it has it's a side effect of something else going on. Unless that's addressed, you're not going to be successful in treating what you're treating. So there's room for improvement.
Yes, but I'm very happy that people are having the conversation, or at least more and more aware. It's been, 5 years ago, it really was a thing discussed. So it's nice to see that it's really, slowly but surely, there's room for improvement, but at least we're moving forward, which is great. And so kudos to you for incorporating it. That's good. Yeah.
And I was just gonna say, related to that, I will, in both of those, usually I never stick to the script. I usually give examples, to try to normalize it. So I'll say, is anything ever scary, and I will often use the word traumatic to try to differentiate. Anything scary, traumatic ever happened, like it being in a car accident or the unexpected death of a loved one, or something that might have an impact on your child's behavior or something like that. So making it sound like I'm asking this question because, not just because I have to, but because it's directly related to all the stuff we're working on. So for you with headaches, thinking about sometimes this can have an impact on headaches or make headaches worse, so I need to know about this because that might be part of how we treat it. And most of the time it turns into a therapy session talking about the parents' trauma. And that was actually a
Yes.
question
Or my
I
cat
had.
died, you know? Like,
Yeah,
okay.
because usually the parents will talk about things
It's
that were more
heartbroken,
traumatic for
you know?
them. So that was something I actually wondered about, was looking at not just child trauma, but parent trauma. And I mean, not that we want to open that can of worms, but I wonder, because there have been literally been times when I'm like, let me go get you some resources, because I'm concerned for your safety too, not just your kid. And because most of the time, and they'll just, I mean, it's word vomit, like, oh yeah, you know, I was sexually abused as a child, and then I was on the street, and then, you know, 2 of my boyfriends tried to kill me. But no, my kid, I don't think he's been, and I'm like, all right, so, any concerns about eating? You know, it's, so, I think the parent aspect and their own trauma is also something that doesn't really, it's not technically our job, but it also impacts how they parent their child.
And from a research standpoint, that's always been my area, is the parent piece. And the biggest predictor of the child's outcomes is not the child's own symptoms, it's the parent's symptoms. And so I've never understood why we don't. Like, it just seems like such a dumb thing.
I mean, I think you touched on it, but the biggest barrier to asking these questions is the feeling of helplessness if they answer in a way that needs help, right? And so if we've identified if TFCBT is the treatment for this and there are providers, then that's the news that needs to be spread, you know, so that people can ask the questions. Because you guys are all asking the questions, but that's you're the therapists. I mean, in many ways, they may need someone else, but it's the docs, you know, that don't have access to it.
You know, I've had several
It's a
of my.
referral bias, right? I mean, to put it crassly and insensitively, everybody you see is crazy. So the, right.
They're here because they need help. We know that already.
So,
Until proven otherwise.
of course, I don't want to mean that, but you get the idea.
That's fine, you're not.
And I think you're right, you know, it is, I think everyone's acknowledges that it's important to ask, and we all know why it's important to ask. It's that responsive piece, like, how do you ask, and how do you feel comfortable asking, and what do you do about it?
Yeah, and more like, well, A, if I ask, it's going to take time, right? And B, if it takes that time, is it going to change anything? And so that's the, I mean, if I can't change anything, if I don't have access to change, then I'm not going to ask. You know?
Well, and who would be doing these trainings?
And that's
Like,
from
who
a,
would be handing them?
You.
being circle back,
On
that's
my
what I
page.
teach.
That's one good thing. That's really the question. Like, we've been trying to do PHQ9 and yep, we don't have a good percentage just handing them to somebody. So I just don't know if it actually, because it still takes time for someone to fill it out. So that's nice to have it be done before you walk through.
I have a question.
Sure.
How many of you here, you see a parent, you have these conversations, you tell the parent to go get some help?
The parent.
Oh, that's what?
How many of you go tell the parent to go get some serious help?
Yeah.
Like, meaning get on anxiety
Find it.
medicines, see a
Yeah.
psychiatrist, counselor.
I do. They don't do it.
I was.
Wait,
Tell them.
Or I'll suggest family counseling,
Yep.
so that I can try to get the buy-in.
Well, I mean,
Do you
I
give them
also-
specific resources, or do you say, I really suggest you should see
I
someone?
put it in the report, yeah. No,
A specific,
I
like,
make
here's a
this-
list?
Yeah.
That's good, good.
I gauge the family. If I think if the family feels that they're saying, we need help, then I might be more open. There are families where I know if I say, I think you should get some help, then they're done with me. So I'll say, well, maybe some family counseling, so everyone can be on the same page and how to help your child. But I know once they get in, the therapist is gonna like work. So I think I play the situation.
I think it's easy when the parent tells, yeah, we need help. You know, the problem is when you're dealing with the family and the parent feels like they're fine, you just treat the child, why are you even bringing this up with me?
The situations where I've told a parent that they need to get help have been families I've known and who keep coming back to me complaining about their kids' anxiety or their kids' whatever, you know, and are so obviously anxious about their kids' anxiety. You know, and I'll point that out to them and say, hey, you know, these things might be related. So yeah, I mean, it's tough, but